I'm presenting on behalf of Jennifer van Beek also, who is not joining today, but who is our research assistant in this research project. She's a second-year research master's of the International Development Studies program. And Hebe and I will share the presentation today. We have roughly divided the presentation in two parts. First, I will give a little bit of a background and present the main outcomes of the exploratory study that we conducted last fall and which we concluded end of December. And then Hebe will take over and talk about the ideas for the follow-up study and reflect on the process that we are going through at the moment and which we would really like to have some discussion on together with you. In terms of background, and it was in the spring of last year, I think, that we were contacted by the people in the municipality of Amsterdam, in particular by the Fearless City program. And they were inspired by ideas on well-being and rethinking the economy from a more inclusive and sustainable perspective. And they function as a separate think tank, but are part of the municipality, and they have the freedom to initiate research, for example, and debates. And this is how they came to Hebe and me. And they were telling us how they were sensing that there is a broad-based broadly shared idea that people are in search of a new economic narrative, and there were already many initiatives ongoing about Amsterdam donut economy, the broad welfare measure, a more inclusive and democratic city, etc. But in all of that, they felt there was still need for a better understanding and monitoring of how the citizens of Amsterdam themselves are really faring, instead of, only measuring and monitoring how the economy is faring. So this is how they came to us, and they were intrigued by this notion of well-being, which is more encompassing than for example the economic growth measure, and even I would say also a little bit more encompassing than the broad welfare measure. And they were also partly inspired by ideas written up in my book on the well-being economics, in which I define well-being as a state of being with others where human needs are met and where one can act meaningfully to pursue one's goals and where one enjoys a satisfactory quality of life. Well-being is a multidimensional concept, as you may all know. It has this material dimension that is very much related to issues of physical, material welfare, income. You can think of housing, infrastructure, etc. But it certainly also has a relational dimension that recognizes that human beings need others to generate well-being. They need social relations, but also people interact with their physical and natural environment. And in doing so, they also create well-being. And there is, to all of that, also a subjective dimension, meaning that people assign value to material and relational well-being, and there are multiple value systems, of course, out there. So they were inspired by that idea, and they were discussing with us if that could be something to do, to do more research on, if there was a need for a well-being type of index that could complement or replace even the economic growth indicator. The main question for that exploratory study was what is the added value of a well-being index for the city of Amsterdam from this more sustainable and inclusive perspective on the urban economy. And the methods that we used were document analysis. We conducted interviews with key informants of the municipality, and we did an initial data exploration of the OES data sets. The main outcomes of that study we wrote up in a research report that is now being translated in English. It's available in Dutch for people who are interested. And there we will review a range of existing initiatives that are already out there, some 8 different initiatives, that one way or the other measure or monitor how the economy and the society is doing at the urban or at the metropolitan level. And there are very useful indicators out there that give an overview of urban or regional economic trends, and other indicators or even stories that give partial insights into different aspects of well-being and the environment, such as safety perceptions or CO2 emissions. A lot is out there. Many of these indicators follow a certain instrument or framework, such as the Monitor Broad Welfare that was developed by CBS, or the Donut Economy, or the indicators follow a certain policy preference at the municipal or regional level. And in addition to these existing initiatives and these existing indicators, there was still a need being expressed by the people that we spoke to for a complementary instrument that provides deeper insights and understandings of well-being in its multiple dimensions. So we looked at the current data that is available. A lot of data is collected. I was not aware of so many data being available because I'm not used to that in my usual research area. There's usually a lack of data. But in the OES data set, there were some 98 material indicators, 43 relational, and 105 subjective indicators. But these are not interconnected, meaning that, for example, there may be information on the green areas in the city, but this is not connected to a indicator that says something about access or about quality assessment. And moreover, the connection of these existing indicators to the municipal practice proves oftentimes to be a challenge, as there is no uniform application, for example, of the broad welfare measure due to lack of a shared assessment framework and associated methods and tools. So people did express this potential added value of a well-being type of index that could provide deeper insight and understanding of how citizens of Amsterdam are really doing, and on issues of structural inequality. They felt that this should ideally be captured in a range of indicators and that can be measured over time, but are also available at different levels of aggregation, head down to neighborhood and community level, so that different cross comparisons could be made. Also, what people expressed that they would like such an index to include somehow the perception and voice of citizens of Amsterdam. They also thought that this could potentially create more participation in existing initiatives and be a tool to identify priorities down to the community and neighborhood level that could be pursued depending on what the needs are. And in the process of the exploratory study, we also came to the realization that maybe it's not a well-being index that people really have in mind, but more a composite index that hides all sorts of different indicators, but more something like a dashboard that visualizes these different indicators and that has switches that can be put on and off depending on the relative priorities. So the sub-conclusion of that was that, yes, there is space for that people saw the added value of a well-being type of measure, but a new index alone would never be enough to redirect urban economy towards well-being. And people also expressed the need for telling a new narrative about the urban economy and connect it to new ways of working. Otherwise, an index would hang above, you know, above the city, and it's not really being put to practice. So we also looked into some preconditions of operationalization of such an index or a dashboard. And we concluded that such a measure should be complementary to existing social and economic indicators, that there are clear links between them across the different well-being domains, but also linked to clear policy objectives, that ideally to be representatives of people's voice, provide democratic handles by creating space for subjective citizens' perspective and lived experience, and it should also follow an assessment framework in which trade-offs of different kinds, for example, between social and economic domains, can be made transparent according to a shared methodology. And we can discuss later what that exactly means. I would like to hand over to Hebe now.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. One of the main things that was really clear to us that the relevance of addressing well-being at different levels of scale. So possibly at the level of the municipality, but definitely also at levels of community, stadsdeel community, and possibly even individual households. So our follow-up studies are much more directed, or ideas for that directed to understanding, so how do Amsterdammers define well-being themselves, and how does that relate to understandings of well-being at different levels of scale. Also, if you then have an idea of what variables are part of that dashboard of well-being, what kind of indicators are then, can be identified and linked across these various domains of well-being, relational and subjective well-being. So data collections, how can you do data collections at multiple levels of scale? But also, can we compare this, this well-being index with approaches that are being done in other cities across the Netherlands and Europe? And finally, the first idea, that's also why we were approached, was also to think about how you can embed this in, the practice of policy making in the city of Amsterdam. But we've kind of dropped that for now, and I will say a bit more about that in the various, in the later reflections that I'm going to bring up. The first study actually that we're going to do is actually funded by the Center for Urban Studies with an XL grant. We've just started to work on it, and it's focused on well-being at the level of the community, and it aims to really bring in a household and community perspective on well-being, but also to bring that in conversation with what is expressed at the municipal level of well-being and understandings of what that should be. So the question that you really ask is, what does well-being mean at a level of a community and neighborhood, and what kind of instrument would then be able to reflect that? And finally, you would really see how if it's possible, to develop it in such a way that it enables local organizations to really monitor change or to monitor well-being. What we are currently or going to do, and we've just started to do that, is we are working in Vensterpolder, which is in Amsterdam Zuidoost. And we are developing a local vision of well-being with key people in the neighborhood and more broader in the Amsterdam Zuidoost district, both residents and neighborhood groups. And well, we do a combination of in-depth interviews with key persons, which includes really 5 initiators, social activists in the neighborhood, but also, for example, the director of the Zuidoost Master Plan, the chair of the Stadsdeel of the Stadsdeel Zuidoost, but also Nasha Aouki, who is the urban strategist that we work closely with. We then will do a combination of focus groups, really a series of 4 sessions. And that's really geared towards developing a local vision of well-being. And then the second one, how you could measure that and the type of indicators that should be part of that. But also to talk about instruments and a political agenda that you build from that, and aspects of monitoring through time. So what we really try is to build on existing initiatives, but to really to also give participants opportunities to really increase insights and participation, and also provide ownership of the content of the instrument, but also the processes of data collection and analysis of reporting. And finally, we will compare that to other sets of data that we have, so that we can find similarities, gaps, but also contradictions between what residents think within Vensterpolder, but also what is actually being messaged as at other levels of the city. As I said, we work in Vensterpolder, and it's part of Amsterdam Zuidoost, and there was just recently released a master plan for Amsterdam Zuidoost, which is supposed to end in 2040, between now and 2040. Through our understandings, we already have understood that one of the main challenges is, how do you actually make sure that the steps that are being taken, or the progress that's being made through the master plan is reflecting the ambitions and the opportunities that community organization and citizens want to bring forward, but also how you make sure that individual groups can actually also monitor that. So that's why there's quite a bit of a coincidence, but we think an excellent match between what we want to do and the opportunity that lies there. We work together with Fearless City here, which belongs to the Amsterdam municipality, but which considers itself a bit of an independent group that works under Grootwassing. And we work with an organization in Vensterpolder, or a project in Vensterpolder, Community Health and Wealth, which is headed by Nasha Aouki, who is an economist, but much more an urban strategist, as she would see herself, who works a lot with the communities in the organization. So we work with community leaders, but also with the Stadsdeel itself. And if everything works according to plan, also with the head of the master plan Zuidoost. So it's quite exciting. I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of that next round of interviews, and the next round of the research. But already, I think up to now, Nicky and I, together actually with Jennifer, have already came across some reflections which were not so much the outcome of the research, but really made us think and might be interesting for the discussion here. And I think the most important actually in this regard is that both Nicky and I actually have a background in development studies, and we work mainly in the global south, in cities in the Global South. And Nicky was already indicating the enormous wealth of data that is present here is in complete contradiction to what we normally encounter, and which allows actually for really working with something like a well-being index, because there is so much available. But then again, it already brings in issues and questions that, well, we thought about that might happen, but not really anticipating how that would work. Is that, of course, these data mean different things for different actors, but also the relevance of data and the relevance of measuring something in a specific way differs between these groups. So there's also a lot of politics involved in there that we think is quite interesting. And the second is that, and that's I think why we went back from examining how you could think about embedding this well-being index in the daily practice, is because we came to realize how siloed the practice is and how hard it is to really bring something that is more integrative. And now we're speaking about a well-being index, but of course the same goes a bit for the donut strategy, how hard it is to get that positioned over different groups. So yeah, I think that's really a challenge. And that is, of course, much different at lower levels of scale, because in most people's daily life, these things really come together. So that's another reflection I would like to bring in. I would like to invite people for a Q&A and discussion. But maybe I'll stop sharing my screen then.
First of all, let us give a round of applause, which is difficult to do online, but so well deserved, to express our appreciation for this wonderful research. And Hebe and Nicky, are you happy to manage the Q&A, or otherwise Jules can share?
Sure, we can do it. It's okay.
Okay.
Okay, any questions, maybe for clarification first, and then we can move to the more substantive discussion points. Is there any need for clarification on anything we presented? I don't see any hands. So, Hebe, I think we were clear. You can always post questions in the chat, of course. So any other questions more on the substantive points? I see a hand by Jules and then Tuna. Jules, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's a really interesting project, I think. Yeah, one question that I had is that if I am correct, you said that an objective of this index is to gain more support for other government policy, municipal policy, and other neighborhood initiatives in Vensterpolder as well through this project. And as it is about the lived experiences of residents in the neighborhood, how do you make sure that you reach the very marginalized groups? Because if you really want to catch all these opinions and visions, I think it's really important to reach all different kinds of groups. How do you make sure you do?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Jules. Shall I respond, Hebe? Yeah, in Vensterpolder, through the connection with Nadia, we work with 5 grassroots organizations, I would like to call them, community initiators, who happen to be all women, and they represent different subgroups in the community. including the most marginalized. So by connecting with them and starting up, first of all, focus groups, but also hopefully some co-creation of indicators and this well-being dashboard, we hope to come, we hope to position ourselves in such a way that we can really build upon, or we can really find the priorities and the needs of the people who are at the margin through these connection points. So it's really a participatory part of the research that we're trying to implement there in Vencepolder. Tuna.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very interesting to listen this very interesting story. I mean, it's exciting. I was thinking about, as soon as I hear the well-being, I was thinking about these studies about gross national happiness in Bhutan. I'm not sure whether you are aware of that, but you know, it's a country, instead of using GDP per capita, they are using GNP per capita as an indicator. And once I had a PhD student who was working on this idea of, can we have happiness indicators in planning? And of course, if you go into that field, there's a lot of happiness studies in architecture and especially in spatial sciences. I was wondering whether you went into that direction.
Yes. Well, let me respond to this question first, and then we take a set of other questions. Because I saw in the chat there are more questions about the well-being index itself and how you can measure, especially subjective aspects of well-being. But yeah, indeed, Tuna, the Gross National Happiness Index we are very familiar to. It has been around for many years already in Bhutan. And what is particularly interesting is, for example, that the government of Bhutan assigns a lot of value to investments in preserving cultural heritage, and this is therefore also captured by this composite index at the national level. But the other question is about happiness. The well-being is not so much about measuring happiness. It's because I don't think you can ever make a policy that would make everybody happy. And I see happiness also as something more, the kind of happiness studies that have been done are oftentimes quite instrumental and departing from an individualistic point of view on happiness. Well-being looks more at how people live well together, and specifically recognizes the human being to be a social human being, and that is captured by the relational dimension of well-being. So there is this debate in the literature a little bit going on between well-being and happiness, and I would like to make the distinction clear. The subjectivity of well-being is, of course, also something that makes it difficult to aggregate. I saw a question on that in the chat, because you cannot add up different things that are measured on different underlying scales. But what you can do is think in terms of people's priorities, and ultimately that is an outcome of what people then negotiate these priorities to be. At some point you need to aggregate, but hopefully by also collecting data both at the city level and at the community and neighborhood level, you can also disaggregate into indicators and priorities that are most relevant for communities and neighborhoods at this level. Would you like to add to that, Hebe?
No, I was actually thinking the same thing. The difficulty of aggregating many of these subjective data can be, well, I wouldn't say countered, but by really giving also the story at different levels, where you would then be able to give these different pictures. I think I'm also picking up a question here, if we're also using the notion of capabilities, as developed by Senna and Nussbaum, I would say that the Wellbeing Index, as we use it here, is, well, developed from different notions, including the notion of capability. So it's not, you don't mention it explicitly, but it's in there definitely as a foundation, actually, to to these kind of different understandings of how you would measure a state of, well, wealth, or a state of being, so to say.
Nanke, there's a raised hand by Nanke that I see.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. I'm really curious also how your welfare index works. But I'm curious to know, because I'm working on a project for the ministry who wants to, you know, re-implement the neighborhood, the wijkaanpak, the neighborhood approach. And there they make a lot of use of the leefbaarheidsmonitor, of course. And this is a Dutch sort of index for livability. And we are pretty critical of this leefbaarheidsmonitor because it's very much based on a sort of white middle class ideals of what a livable neighborhood is supposed to be, and what is safe and what is unsafe, and what is aesthetically attractive and not. And I'm wondering, how do you relate to that kind of problems that you have when you are developing a monitor? And also, how do you relate to this leefbaarheidsmonitor?
I think actually the project that we're currently working on addresses precisely this by developing an understanding of what well-being would be at the level of a community, of Venterpolder in this case, and relating that to what understandings of well-being, and it won't be exactly well-being, but could be leefbaarheid at that specific level would be. So it's precisely addressing this, because you really want to bring forward the notion at the level that you're trying to say something about. So to also use a definition or a conceptualization of well-being in that specific at that specific level, and also use indicators that are meaningful at that specific level. So also not a kind of an indicator which is not very related to well, the notion being expressed at a specific level.
But then only policymakers who work at that particular site can basically use your outcomes, because your outcomes say something different about what is well-being in this place than in another place.
Yeah.
And also the outcomes of the monitor quantitatively are, yeah, I'm not clear. Are you using quantitative data there also?
Yeah, we are aiming to use a combination of the two, but you can imagine that you would have a well-being index at a level of a neighborhood, which also gets specific, where specific emphasis is being put on some indicators in neighborhood A and in other indicators in neighborhood B. So there is so it will not be the same it could be the same indicator.
The outcomes will not be the same. What is like very high well-being means something different in one place than another. So then the question of Caroline about what can policymakers then do with that is a good one. Like, how do you bring that to a higher abstraction level? Like, what could the ministry, for example, do with that kind of specificity then?
I think it's important. I'm not sure that we're immediately aiming at the ministry, but we do aim at some point at the municipality. I do think you come to a point where you can bring out the emphasis that's being put on certain indicators as identification of well-being, and direct policy to be working on those specific indicators. That's what my immediate response would be. Nicky, can you add to this?
Yes, I think that is the problem that Nanke mentions is exactly the problem we encounter in the existing data set. The existing data are often collected at the urban level and are not always very much representative, as you noted, of what goes on in specific neighborhoods. And as you rightfully say, there's so much difference. So I agree with you that the type of indicators that are currently there are more they are biased, therefore. So that's why we try to pursue, and through this pilot in Vensterpolder, we need to implement that and start to see what comes out of it. So we're not there yet at the level of measuring, but we try to make it a bottom-up process that allows us to bring out exactly these kind of differences. Well-being is a very broad concept, so probably in the process we will find much more specific concepts and indicators, but starting from the bottom up, I think that's the important point of departure here.
I think we have a lot of questions coming up, so maybe I suggest we only have 15 minutes. Maybe I suggest we take the hands already raised, if that is okay with the speakers. So I have Sabina Heldert, that's the name I see at least there. David, am I missing anyone here? No, these three. So Sabina, Heldert, and David. Maybe we can take these three questions and you can try to answer. It's a hard task, I know, and then perhaps address some of the questions in the chat, if you can. Thank you. So Sabina.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. So hi, my question perhaps is a little bit more theoretical, because I'm, first of all, thank you so much for the very comprehensive and informative presentations. I am a PhD researcher in my final year. And my research is about well-being and urban regeneration, but in the context of China. And one of my big challenges has actually been to try to contextualize these discussions and conceptualizations of well-being that are very much developed in the global north, which I think is something that Hebe was kind of hinting to. And I was really wondering, and yeah, I mean, it's been very difficult to try to find indicators, for example, for a context which is social culturally different. And I wonder if you've had any reflections or thoughts on how your work could somehow inform other contexts, or if you even think that is suitable, and if it even should be done, or how.
Thank you, Sabina. And then Heldert had a question. You need to unmute yourself and please tell us your correct name because I can't really see it.
Yes, my name is Helene. My question is, when you were in the beginning telling what one of the conclusions was that the people you interviewed were like in a silo, everyone had his own department. And about 8 years ago, I had my master in sociology in urban problems. And I followed a long process of participants and municipality who had to decide just about a simple thing like a road. And when listening, I heard that they all spoke from a different way of thinking. And looking at that, I found a theory which is specialized in using language. And what I've done is just analyzing all the pieces that were there in paper about meetings and interviewing a lot of people. And then it came out that this was one of the biggest problems, that everybody in his own life has a an own aim, which is being translated in words, and those words could mean something different to another one who in fact has the same aim. But there is a theory, everybody is talking from this kind of domain, and I think that is one of the biggest problems of doing all this research, that no one is meaning the same with well-being, for example, which is already a container idea. And well-being, for example, for an artist is something totally different than for an industrialist or whatever. So for me, the question is, how do you tackle, in a way, this aspect of the language all those people use?
Thank you, Helene. We have two very good questions. So please, Nicky and Hebe, if you can respond, and then maybe wrap up by responding to some of the chat questions, if you can. David, unfortunately, had to go. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I read the suggestion by David, and we will follow it up. So I think the two questions, thank you for them, are in a way associated, the context and the language. Of course, in the study, we depart from this very broad notion of well-being, because for us it's helpful to point out that this is something that is multidimensional, and it allows us to depart from mainstream economic theory that assumes that people are rational economic agents that maximize individual interests. And by using the concept of well-being, we can take a different starting point by recognizing people interact with their social and physical and natural environment and actually need others in order to create well-being. And so that is the concept is more of a starting point than maybe an end in the research. I think in the process of doing the research, our purpose is to exactly find the appropriate words, the appropriate terminology, the important indicators that matter to people's daily lives, and that are prioritized in the pursuit of well-being. But yeah, you need a common language. So at some point you need to choose some concepts to work with. But for us, there's a whole theory on the economy behind that. And I don't know what will come out. I mean, already in our collaboration with Nadia, the urban strategist, we noticed that she uses different terms also. She uses wealth and health. So there you go. You know, what do you mean exactly then by well-being? What do you mean by wealth and health? So this is, you know, this is of course something we encounter in practice. I think the importance of the well-being concept is thus the three-dimensionality. So that is something we anticipate to see reflected in the indicators that are going to be selected. But what these will be, I don't know yet. And secondly, I wanted to respond to language being so important. That's true, but that also applies to the methods with which people work, because many times we find people working from maybe the same goal. They work with a doelenboom. I don't know how that's to say that in English, the goals tree. That may be shared, but then the way they assess the criteria for reaching those goals is very different. They work with different indicators and they use different ways of measuring and making a comparison between the different criteria. Now, in our case, given that well-being is a multidimensional concept, implicitly we would propose a multi-criteria analysis methodology and not a singular cost-benefit type of analysis that an economist would use. So just to give you an example of differences in methods that also need to be considered in connection to different language. Hebe, would like to complement?
I think I can maybe address the question that was raised by Sabina on the different context and contextualization of well-being. And I think it's indeed quite interesting. I would say that both Nicky and myself actually have, and I think the working out of well-being is really applied or developed also from understandings that are being used in very different contexts than in the global north. So that's not what was, we're actually trying it out here. We're further developing this specific case for Amsterdam, but the theoretical concept is not developed in the global north or just to understand the global north. But I think what really makes a huge difference is to be able to actually to really contextualize well-being. So to try to understand, I really don't know how you would do that in a context of China without, because you need to understand what is being used locally to give an indication of how cities are faring, or what is being debated through social media, or what is being discussed or aimed at in urban regeneration process that you were looking at. So the contextualization is critical, but I think actually the well-being, the framework indicates these three dimensions. So, but these are very broad dimensions that I think do allow for very specific local subconceptualizations of that. So I would say that's challenging, but that's also what makes it interesting, right? I'm not sure if that answers your question.
It does. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any raised hands. So if there are any more questions Hebe and Nicky would like to address from the chat, you can. We have just a few minutes though, and if we have covered everything, you want to have a look through the chat and see if there is something.
There was a question by Deborah that I did not fully understand.
Yeah.
The question on the multi-species approach. Could you perhaps enlighten us?
Deborah, I don't know if she's there.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I was maybe. Thank you so much, first of all, and it's for this broad research and very well. It's beautiful, and it inspires me because it touches also on work that I am doing, and I understand this area a little bit from the people that I know there doing projects. And I was wondering how this research might inform, for example, my research, in which I'm taking a multi-species approach. So there are indicators. So I'm also trying to work across these silos, and I recognize the challenge in that. And I'm just wondering how you aim to that the results and analysis and reflections in your research can reach these different silos that believe knowledge gets built up in a certain way, and this is how we will apply any kind of input at for example, the municipal or Stadsdale, the district level, into some kind of plan implementation. I hope that's more clear.
Thank you, Deborah. Yeah, it's a huge challenge, and of course the ultimate implementation is not up to us, but we collaborate with people who will try to do that. And I think for us as researchers, it is, I think I would be happy if we can achieve to make these different aspects of well-being in what form of indicator or priority visible in a comprehensive framework that allows policymakers to consider the trade-offs they are actually making between these different domains, and making it visible, because in current frameworks many of these trade-offs are hidden, or it doesn't come up as a trade-off, because the only trade-offs that are considered are maybe of financial nature. And then people realize after some time there are also other impacts, but they were not visible from the start. So I think for us the challenge is to come to the right identification of relevant indicators from a bottom-up approach, but also to work with a framework that brings these different indicators together into one framework that is about a well-being economy, and that makes trade-offs that are between the economy or the social domain or the environment immediately visible, so that the impacts that are being that are being created are immediately visible from the start and can be included in the decision making, which ultimately is political, but that is, I think, what we can do as researchers.